Please be seated. As we hear this passage from Luke 10:38 to 42, I invite you to step into the scene. Imagine a home filled with the warmth of hospitality, the hum of activity, and the presence of Jesus himself. Two sisters welcome him, one caught up in the task of serving, the other drawn into the moment, sitting at his feet. Sometimes this story is reduced down to choosing between work and worship. But what if we instead reflect on the invitation, an invitation to notice what pulls at our attention, to consider where we find ourselves in the presence of Christ, and to listen for what truly matters. As you hear these words, allow yourself to be open to that invitation. Let us hear these words from Luke 10:38 to 42, as written in the New International Version. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." For the word that lives among us, shaping and calling us, we give thanks. May we walk in love and faith.
Good morning again, everyone. Just a couple comments to begin with before I look at this passage with you. First of all, if you haven't had an opportunity to sit in front of David Ripley when there's a hymn sung, I would recommend that you do that. What a voice, my goodness. Secondly, I want to just thank the worship team. I've filled in for Pastor Patty 3 or 4 times over the last year, and I have to tell you, Stephen, Hillary, Dave, Seth, this morning, Sue Ellen, many of the deacons, everybody is always so well prepared. And if you're not aware that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes just to make this hour happen every Sunday. And so, on behalf of those of us that are this congregation, I want to thank the worship team this morning just for the great work that they do. Accoutrement of worship is very important, just setting the stage for us to hear from God. So thank you, team. This is a passage, my friends, that we have read many times, or maybe you're new to the faith, or maybe you have no faith at all and you've never read it. But I will tell you that for those that are in the Christian tradition, it's one that we've read many times. We've heard sermons about it. We've listened to it in Sunday school. And we have probably been influenced to look at this passage in a particular way. If you read some of the commentaries and even some of the prayers of the mystics, they looked at it in a particular way. And even some modern theologians, as they've tried to offer explanation, I feel sometimes that they've reduced it to something that's a little bit too simple. I think this passage is a little bit more nuanced, and I think there's more than one way to look at it. So I'm not discrediting or discounting what church tradition, what theologians from a generation past have suggested. I'm just saying that maybe there's a fresh way to look at this, and I invite you to look at it with me in that way this morning. The traditional way, of course, was that Mary was upset and she was worried, and rather Martha. And Mary was calm, and she chose to do, in one translation, the New International, and I chose it purposefully, to do the better thing by sitting at the feet of Jesus. Actually, a better or more perfect transliteration of that verse in 42 is that Mary has chosen the good part. So I don't think, as we look at this passage, that Jesus was pitting Mary against Martha or Martha against Mary. And I'm not sure that it's always helpful to look at this in a dualistic way. Mary's good, Martha's bad. Listening to Jesus is good, service is bad. Mary's silence is good, Martha's assertiveness, assertive woman, ooh, that's bad. Prayer is good, busyness is bad. Oftentimes when we read the scripture, we reduce it to this simple dualism, that there's just two simple choices. As I've suggested to you, I think it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And I don't believe that Jesus, our Savior, was affirming Mary by putting Martha down. Any of us that have been in leadership know that you don't bring someone in for an evaluation on a job and compare them against a co-worker, but you set it against a standard, against a set of expectations. Jesus was not, in this passage, scolding Martha and setting Mary as this perfect example. I believe, as I've said, that the passage is a bit more nuanced. Now, a little background. Mary and Martha were sisters. And if you are familiar with the Gospel of John, they had a brother, and his brother's name was Lazarus. And after Lazarus had died, you recall that Martha, getting that tongue-tied this morning, Martha, she actually questioned Jesus as to why he came so late. But she also expressed her confidence in him that he would raise Lazarus from the dead. There's the possibility that Mary may have been spoken of in other passages, and there's a lot of question about this, that she was one of the Marys that anointed Jesus with a perfume and then wiped them with her hair. What's most important to know is that both Mary and Martha were friends of Jesus. Now, this Lenten season, Pastor Patty has chosen a preaching series that we can reflect upon that has as its theme the messy middle. Don't you hate that? Don't you hate mess and to be in the middle? But that's sort of where I think I find myself most of the time these days, in the messy middle. I don't have all the answers to the questions that I used to so easily just come up with, but I find a lot of mess, and I've learned to be comfortable in not knowing. This messy middle is sort of a call to live in between. So the question of the hour this morning, as I look at this passage, and maybe you have another question, but thinking about this theme that Pastor Patty has chosen, is how do we live in the messy middle of active service and quiet contemplation? How do we live in the middle of that? Let's unpack that a little bit more this morning. Now, Martha was the head of the household because she opened her home to Jesus. We can see that she was the one that invited Jesus there. So it's obvious, based on this passage, that she was hospitable, and quite possibly had the gift of hospitality. sharing this story with my wife. She's heard it before. As a matter of fact, I wrote a couple articles about this, but my life has been full of a lot of experiences, and many of my experiences have and my life's understanding has been shaped by my parents. And both of my parents, in the last legs of their life, this final stage, I've been doing a lot of reflecting. And yesterday, as I was thinking through this, I recall growing up in a home that was very, very much regimented. My parents had sort of this, we followed a certain standard. We got up at a certain time. We did certain things. Both of my parents were preachers in an international denomination. But I think that my mom, if she didn't have the gift of hospitality, she was a very, very hospitable person. And I think my wife would agree with me. And from the earliest of my younger years, I remember what my mom did to make people feel welcome in our home. We had a lot of special people in our home because my parents were part of a denomination in the early years, back in the 60s, where social service and committing to the poor and the marginalized of the community was very, very much part of the denomination. So my parents were constantly doing toy drives and food drives and just helping countless thousands of people. My mom, I can probably say that she singly handled or helped 300,000 or 400,000 people in the course of her life. An extraordinary human being. And even today, as she's on her last leg, she's still trying to figure out how to help somebody where she can barely breathe herself. It's pretty amazing. But as a young boy, I remember dignitaries, mayors, fire chiefs, captains of industry coming to our home. I also remember a lot of people who didn't have a place to live, a lot of people that were without food sitting at our dinner table as well. And some of those people didn't leave for 3 or 4 years, which was interesting for me as a young boy that had to make room for others living in our home. But Mom always made everybody feel welcome, from the mints on the dining room table or in the living room as they sat, to the ways that she told us about how to do a place setting. Did anybody of you grow up in one of those homes where the place setting had to be just so, and the fork had to be, and my job was to go around the table and make sure that the fork was only this far from the plate, right? And every single one of them had to look the same. You remember that? My mom did that, I believe, because she wanted to express welcome, make people feel welcome. But the thing that left the greatest impression on my mind is what she referred to as guest towels. Now, as I shared this story with my wife, she said we had towels in our home. My mom didn't have towels in the bathroom called guest towels, first and foremost, I don't believe, because she wanted to have nice decor, although she did have nice decor. They were color-coded towels. They were folded perfectly. They smelled great. And to the touch, boy, they were just so soft. You know those really fluffy towels with a lot of, whatever stuff is in there, the pile? Amazing. A little 7-year-old boy coming in from playing outside got reprimanded on not 1, 2, but more than occasions that I can count for wiping his hands on the guest towels. You're to use that towel behind the door, that ratty one, to wipe your hands. Because obviously when you wash your hands as a 7-year-old, only half the dirt comes off in the sink. The rest of it comes off on the towel, right? But I say all that to say that guest towel memory suggested to me that my mom was hospitable, that she understood hospitality. And it allowed me to then have a lens to see people in my life who were hospitable. My wife has the gift of hospitality, not me. I've learned to be hospitable, but I don't have that gift. I can recognize that gift in others and affirm it and see it, but it's not a gift that I have. This morning, my friends, if you have the gift of hospitality, we as a congregation affirm you. We recognize your unique gifting and your special place in our midst. However, if you do not have the gift of hospitality, I pray that you recognize it in others. In our homes, in our communities, and even in this church, we would be lost without those who have the gift of hospitality. We need Marthas. Did you hear me? We need Marthas. But as we think about the importance and how beautiful that gift of hospitality is, I think it's important for us to also understand, particularly if you are blessed with that gift of hospitality, or if you've learned to be hospitable, that helping and serving and caring in and of itself will not quiet your spirit. In and of itself, it will not center you. If you think your good works in and of itself, you might feel good when you do something for someone else. But that's only half the equation. Brian Zahn, who is an author that I've been reading a lot of, he wrote a book called The Unvarnished Jesus, and here's what he said. Martha, the busy sister, is well-intended, but her noble intentions aren't enough to prevent her from being anxious and troubled. Peace of mind is not the merited award for strict adherence to duty. So don't think that just because you do hospitable things that you're going to be centered or that you're going to have peace of mind. We'll come back to that in a moment. It's also important to understand that, at least as I see this, and I'm going to share a personal example in just a moment, that to get mad or to resent others who may not see what you see if you have that gift, we can't get mad at them. If you have the gift of hospitality like Martha, you are naturally going to worry. If you have the gift of hospitality, you're going to be concerned. You're going to anticipate, you're going to plan, you're going to think ahead. And you're going to be that one in the room that thinks about where someone should put their coats or what time coffee hour starts or whatever. And it's important to, as I said before, affirm that. But if that's your gift, don't get mad at others that don't see what you see. 35 years ago, I was in Haiti, and I shared a story with you about that before. On our way to Haiti, it was quite an experience going with a group mostly who only spoke Spanish and did not speak English. There was just a few that spoke English. The senior pastor was the friend of mine. It was the largest Spanish congregation in Paterson, New Jersey, over 2,000 members on a Sunday morning. We went with a delegation of 25 to Petite Rivière de Nips in Haiti. I shared a story with you the last time that I was in this pulpit. But I remember trying to get 24 folks from Paterson, New Jersey, through customs in Haiti, where the primary language is Creole. Very few spoke Spanish. And not only, we didn't just have 24 pieces of luggage, we had about 100 pieces of luggage, because they were bringing medical supplies and much needed things for the people of Haiti. And I recall this group trying to get through customs, and because I think I have the gift of administration, not the gift of hospitality, but I've learned to be hospitable, I was annoyed after about 20 minutes. I said, why can't these people get their act together? If they just would organize their suitcases. I had a whole plan. I had a schematic that I did on paper because it was taking us forever to get through customs the way that they were doing it. I was so annoyed. And I actually spoke to the number 2 in command of the church and said, we could do this another way. And he looked at me and he said, why? And I then took a step back and I looked around. And not one person in that room was worried that this was an inefficient process, because they were doing something that was much higher. They were enjoying each other. They were enjoying conversation. They were listening to stories. They were practicing the presence, being present in the moment. In that moment, I was resenting, because while I didn't have the gift of hospitality, having the gift of administration and learning to be hospitable, I thought it could have been done a lot better. But I missed something. Brian Zahn goes on to say in this passage, peace of mind is not the merited award for strict adherence to duty, but is a state cultivated through contemplative practices centered on Jesus. Isaiah said, you will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are stayed on you. Without some form of contemplative practice, we will spend too much time in one of three undesirable mental states. We'll either be drifting back into the painful past, we'll be flitting about in the distracted present, or we'll be rushing ahead into the anxious future. Mary had learned the good practice to sit with Jesus in the contemplative present, without intentionally cultivating what Brother Lawrence called the practice of the presence of God. Our service for God will eventually become burdensome and will either be abandoned or carried out as an onerous duty. Now, as I think about contemplation, my personal experience, and I define contemplation in a broad way: prayer, fasting, scripture, meditation, reflecting. All of these things are things that we do as we quiet ourselves in the presence of the Lord. I believe, for me personally, I can't speak for you, but they have been necessary to help me in navigating life. There was a time in my life when I was much busier, and I'm really busy now, so I can't even imagine. But I had 4 young children at home. My wife and I were going crazy. I had a significant ministry of managing multi-million-dollar budgets and hundreds of staff workers. And at the same time, I was trying to balance my graduate studies. Without a quiet time, a personal time of reflection each day, I don't think that I could have managed or sorted through the priorities of the day. I needed that time just to be able to make it through the day, because there was so much involved with serving others. Now, contemplation, as described in this passage as sitting in the presence of God, is not an exercise of inactivity. It's not an exercise, or it's not a do-nothing experience. It's not a do-nothing experience. It is quite the contrary. Listening and waiting and reflecting and meditating and contemplating in the presence of God should very much be seen as an active exercise. And finally, I want to say that in order for our active service or our acts of hospitality to keep from becoming laborious or to feel like they're not dutiful, finding time to contemplate, to be in His presence, is necessary. And it also will keep us, as I learned personally, from an overrated sense of self-importance. In fact, it is hoped that service will flow out of our contemplation, out of our quiet time in His presence. The time that we spend in contemplation, in quiet before God, will give each of us the ability to sit with others when words don't work. I didn't share this story with my wife, but at the passing of my mother-in-law, one of my good friends came to that funeral. And he was a retired pastor who was a Wycliffe Bible translator who spent most of his life in Peru. But he became a very, very dear, close friend of mine, Reverend Ezekiel Romero. And Ezekiel was always with me. And he came to my mother-in-law's funeral. And do you know what? He came when the funeral home opened. And do you know when he left? When they closed the funeral home doors. He didn't say a word. He sat there for about 5 hours, just being present. I believe because Ezekiel had practiced the presence, he learned how to be present with others. Some would say, what a waste of time. I was blown away. Here was a man who sat for 5 hours, very important man, but felt that it was important to be present. The story of Mary and Martha is not an example of an either-or exercise or behavior. The story offers us a rich and nuanced message about the diversity of gifts within the Christian community and the importance of seeking God's presence in all aspects of life. As a congregation this morning, can we affirm and validate that those that have the gift of hospitality, can we see it? Can we see that what they're doing is that they're exercising their gift? As we have opportunity, we would do well to express our appreciation for those that are always serving. And if we do not have that gift, like me, may each of us work at being more hospitable with others. Let's work at being more sensitive to the needs of those around us. So, my prayer for us this morning is that we would learn from those who have modeled their lives after Mary. May we allow those who have found strength and direction and comfort in quiet meditation to teach us. May we recognize that there are many ways of sitting in quiet in God's presence. Contemplation, listening, rejoicing when something wonderful has happened, singing. I was enjoying being in God's presence as I listened to David sing this morning. Praying out loud, taking a nature walk, carefully listening to the birds, kneeling, corporate worship with others, absolute silence, groaning during times of suffering, questioning, asking. All of these are forms of doing what Mary did that day in God's presence. May our contemplation compel us to enter into a life of serving others, and may our service be fueled by the times we spend in God's presence. As Pastor Patty says every Sunday, may it be so, my friends. May it be so.